They called her worthless, a mistake. The girl no one wanted until the day a king looked into her eyes and saw something that made kingdoms tremble. This is the story of Lyra Voss, the outcast who became a queen feared across 5 nations, a woman who discovered she carried ancient power in her veins, power that could tear the world apart or rebuild it from ash. But power means nothing without enemies, and hers were gathering in the shadows, sharpening their blades. Stay with me until the end. You won't believe where this goes. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels tonight. The afternoon Lyra Voss was thrown out of the merchant's quarter. The sky had gone the color of old bruises. Purple-gray clouds hung low over the crooked rooftops of Harrow's Gate, and the wind smelled like rain and rotting fish from the docks. She stood in the middle of the narrow cobblestone street with her belongings in a canvas sack at her feet, 3 dresses, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a book of pressed flowers her mother had given her before she died. Around her, people stopped to watch. Women in their market shawls whispered behind their hands. Men leaned against doorways with their arms crossed, smirking. Children pointed and laughed. "There she is," someone said. "The fool who thought she could marry up." Lyra's face burned. She kept her chin level, her hands steady at her sides, but inside she felt like she was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Across the street, standing in the doorway of the largest merchant house in the district, was Corvin Aldridge. He was handsome in that polished, calculated way, dark hair slicked back, expensive coat buttoned tight across his chest. And beside him, draped on his arm like a piece of jewelry, was Celine Morrow. Blonde, beautiful. Daughter of the wealthiest trade family in 3 provinces. Celine smiled. It wasn't kind. "Did you really think he loved you?" she called out, her voice carrying across the street like a whip crack. "A girl with no family, no money, no name?" Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere between her chest and her mouth. Corvin stepped forward then, looking at her for the first time in days. His expression was completely blank, like she was a stranger he'd passed 100 times without noticing. "You were a distraction," he said flatly. "Nothing more. I needed someone to pass the time with while the marriage contracts were being finalized. Surely you didn't think it was real?" Someone in the crowd laughed. Others joined in. Lyra felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. For 6 months, she'd believed him, believed every word, every promise, every whispered plan about the future they'd build together. She'd given him everything, her trust, her hope, her body. And he'd taken it all knowing he'd throw her away the moment it suited him. "You're pathetic," Celine added, examining her nails with exaggerated boredom. "Honestly, Corvin, I don't know what you saw in her. She's not even pretty." "She was available," Corvin said with a shrug. That was enough. The crowd roared with laughter. Lyra stood there trembling as the mockery washed over her. She'd never felt so small, so worthless, so completely erased. Corvin didn't even look at her again. He just turned and walked back inside, pulling Celine with him. The door shut with a heavy thud that echoed down the street like a coffin lid closing. The crowd started to drift away. The show was over. Lyra stood there for another 5 minutes, maybe 10. She lost track of time. Her mind had gone somewhere far away, somewhere quiet and numb where the pain couldn't reach her. Then slowly she bent down and picked up her sack. She slung it over her shoulder, turned away from the merchant house, and started walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. For 3 days, Lyra wandered the streets of Harrow's Gate like a ghost. She had no family. Her mother had died when she was 14, and her father had disappeared years before that. Run off with debts he couldn't pay and a gambling problem he couldn't quit. She'd been working as a seamstress's assistant when she met Corvin, barely scraping by, living in a cramped room above a bakery that smelled like yeast and burned sugar. Now she had nothing. The bakery owner had rented her room to someone else the day after Corvin cast her out. Word traveled fast in Harrow's Gate. Everyone knew she'd been used and discarded. No one wanted to be associated with that kind of shame. She tried to find work. She went to every shop, every merchant, every tavern. They all turned her away. "We don't need help," they'd say. Or, "Come back next month." Or, most often, they'd just look at her with pity and shake their heads. She slept under bridges, in alleyways. Once, in the doorway of a church, until a priest chased her off at dawn. She ate what she could beg or steal, crusts of bread, bruised apples, half-eaten meat pies pulled from trash bins behind restaurants. And every night she told herself she'd leave in the morning, that she'd walk out of Harrow's Gate and never look back. But where would she go? On the fourth day, she met an old woman selling herbs at the edge of the market. The woman had a face like crumpled paper and eyes that seemed to see straight through skin and bone. She looked at Lyra for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You're running from something." Lyra almost kept walking, but something in the woman's voice stopped her. "I'm not running," Lyra said quietly. "I just don't belong here anymore." "Then where do you belong?" Lyra didn't have an answer. The old woman reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. She pressed it into Lyra's hand. "Go north," the woman said, "to the borderlands. There's a town called Ironwood. You'll find work there." "Why would they hire me when no one here will?" "Because they don't care about shame in the borderlands. They care about survival." The woman's eyes glinted. "And because you're not what you think you are, girl. You never were." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, the woman turned and disappeared into the crowd. Lyra opened the pouch. Inside were 10 silver coins, more money than she'd seen in months. She stood there, staring at the coins, feeling the weight of them in her palm. Then she closed the pouch, tucked it into her dress, and started walking north. The borderlands weren't a place people went by choice. It was a stretch of wild, unforgiving territory that hugged the edge of the Hale Kingdom. Rocky hills, dense forests, rivers that ran fast and cold. The towns out there were small and hard, filled with farmers who worked soil that fought back, hunters who tracked wolves bigger than dogs, and traders who moved goods along routes that bandits loved to haunt. Lyra had heard stories about the borderlands her whole life, stories about the king who ruled them. Ronan Hale. They said he was a man carved from stone, that he'd killed his first enemy at 14, during a border skirmish with raiders from the eastern wastes, that he didn't smile, didn't forgive, didn't waste time on anything soft. His kingdom wasn't rich. There were no grand palaces or glittering courts, just fortresses built into mountainsides, soldiers who could fight in their sleep, and a reputation that kept enemies at bay. They also said he'd never married, never took a consort, never showed interest in anyone or anything except war and territory. Lyra had never imagined she'd end up in his kingdom. But 2 weeks after she left Harrow's Gate, she found herself standing at the edge of a dirt road that led straight into Hale territory. She'd walked for days, slept in barns and under trees, eaten bread she'd begged from travelers. Her feet were blistered and bleeding. Her dress was torn and filthy. The silver coins were almost gone. She'd spent them on food and passage across a river, and she had nowhere else to go. So she kept walking. The first town she reached was called Ironwood. It sat in a valley between 2 forested ridges, a cluster of wooden buildings with smoke rising from their chimneys. There was a market square in the center, smaller and rougher than the one back in Harrow's Gate, and a tavern with a faded sign that read, "The Split Axe." Lyra walked into the market and tried to make herself invisible. She wasn't good at it. People noticed her immediately, a stranger, young and alone, with desperate eyes and clothes that didn't belong. "You lost?" a woman asked. She was standing behind a stall piled high with root vegetables, her arms thick and scarred from years of hard work. "No," Lyra said quietly. "Just passing through." The woman didn't look convinced. "Passing through to where?" Lyra didn't have an answer. The woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You look half-starved. When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday." "What'd you have?" "An apple." The woman muttered something under her breath that sounded like a curse. She grabbed a turnip from the pile, wiped it on her apron, and handed it over. "Here. It's not much, but it's something." Lyra took it, her throat tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." The woman crossed her arms. "You looking for work?" "Yes." "Can you clean?" "Yes." "Can you cook?" "A little." The woman grunted. "Tavern needs help. Talk to Maris. Tell her B sent you." Lyra nodded. "Thank you," she said again. B waved her off. "Don't thank me. Maris is mean as a snake. But she pays fair, and she doesn't put up with men getting handsy. You'll be safe there, at least." Maris was, in fact, mean as a snake. She was a tall, sharp-faced woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that looked like they could spot a lie from across a room. She looked Lyra up and down when she walked into the tavern, then snorted. "You're scrawny," Maris said. "I can work," Lyra replied. "You better. I'm not running a charity." Maris jerked her head toward the back. "There's a room upstairs. Roof leaks when it rains. You get 1 meal a day and 2 silver a week. You steal from me, I'll throw you out myself. You cause trouble. Same thing. Understood?" "Understood." "Good. Start now. Floors need scrubbing." The work was harder than anything Lyra had done before. She scrubbed floors until her knees were raw and her hands cracked and bled. She hauled buckets of water from the well out back until her shoulders screamed. She served drinks to men who stared too long and said things that made her stomach twist. Though Maris kept her word, if anyone touched, they were out the door before they could blink. She learned to keep her head down, her mouth shut, and her hands moving. But she was good at it. She didn't complain, didn't cry, even when she wanted to. She just worked. And slowly, over the weeks, something shifted inside her. She started to feel like she might actually survive this. The other workers at the tavern were a rough bunch, but they weren't cruel. There was Finn, the cook, a broad-shouldered man with burns up and down his forearms, and a laugh that sounded like rocks tumbling downhill. He told terrible jokes and slipped Lyra extra bread when Maris wasn't looking. There was Kella, a serving girl about Lyra's age with red hair and a sharp tongue. She taught Lyra how to dodge grabbing hands and how to pour ale so it didn't foam over. And there was old Tam, who cleaned the stables and hardly ever spoke, but who nodded at Lyra every morning like she mattered. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in Harrow's Gate. At night, alone in her leaking room, Lyra would lie on her cot and stare at the ceiling. She thought about Corvin less and less. The pain was still there, but it was duller now, distant. She was starting to realize something. She didn't miss him. She missed the version of herself who'd believed she was worth loving. And maybe, just maybe, she could find that version again. The king came to Ironwood on a cold morning in late autumn. Lyra didn't know he was coming. Nobody did. Ronan Hale didn't announce his visits. He just showed up, unannounced and usually alone, riding a black warhorse that looked like it could trample a man without slowing down. Lyra was outside the tavern, sweeping the front steps, when she heard the hoofbeats. She looked up and saw him. He was bigger than she'd expected, taller, broader. He wore dark leather and steel plate that looked like it had seen 100 battles. And his face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, scarred cheek, eyes the color of winter storms. His hair was black and tied back, and there was something about the way he sat in the saddle that made it clear he didn't need a crown to prove he was a king. He rode straight through the market square, people scattering out of his way like leaves in a gale, and stopped in front of the tavern. His eyes swept over the street, over the buildings, over the people, and then, for just a second, they landed on Lyra. She froze. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between curiosity and recognition, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. Then he dismounted in one smooth motion, handed the reins to a boy who'd come running, and walked into the tavern without a word. Lyra stood there, heart pounding, broom still clutched in her hands. Maris stuck her head out the door. "What are you doing standing there like a statue? Get inside. The king wants food, and I'll be damned if we serve him cold stew." Lyra hurried in. Ronan Hale sat at a table in the corner, arms crossed, watching the room like he was cataloging every person in it. Maris brought him bread, roasted meat, and ale. He ate in silence, methodical and efficient, like eating was just another task to complete. Lyra tried not to stare. She failed. There was something about him that pulled at her, something she couldn't name. It wasn't just that he was the king, though that was part of it. It was something deeper, something that made her skin prickle and her chest feel tight. She told herself it was fear. That made sense, didn't it? He was the most powerful man in the kingdom. Of course she'd be afraid. But it didn't feel like fear. And then he looked at her again. This time, he spoke. "You're new here," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel underfoot. Lyra's pulse jumped. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Where are you from?" "Harrow's Gate." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Long way to come for tavern work." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. He watched her for another moment, his gaze heavy and unreadable. Then he picked up his ale, drank, and set the cup down with a solid thunk. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lyra. Lyra Voss." He repeated it, like he was testing how it sounded. "Lyra." She nodded, unsure what else to do. He studied her for a few seconds longer, then stood abruptly. He dropped several silver coins on the table, far more than the meal cost, and walked out without another word. The door shut behind him. Lyra exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Maris appeared beside her, staring after the king with a furrowed brow. "That was strange," she muttered. "What was?" "He never asks questions. He eats, he leaves." "That's it." Maris glanced at Lyra. "What did you say to him?" "Nothing. He asked where I was from." Maris didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. "Well, get back to work. Those tables won't clean themselves." The king came back 3 days later. And then again, a week after that. Each time he ate in silence, watched the room with those storm-gray eyes, and left without much conversation. But each time, before he went, he looked at Lyra. Just a glance, nothing more. But it was enough to make people notice. "Why does the king keep coming here?" one of the regulars asked Maris one night after Ronan had left. Maris shrugged. "Food's good." "Food's the same as it always was," the man argued. "He never used to come more than once a season. Now it's every few days." Maris didn't answer, but her eyes flicked to Lyra, who was wiping down tables in the corner, trying to ignore the conversation. Kella cornered her later that night while they were washing dishes. "The king's looking at you," Kella said bluntly. Lyra's hand stilled in the soapy water. "He's not." "He is." "Everyone's noticed." He's the king. He looks at everyone," Kella snorted. "Not like that, he doesn't." Lyra didn't know what to say to that, because part of her, a small, stupid part, had noticed it too. The way his gaze lingered, the way he seemed to track her movements even when he was pretending not to. But it didn't mean anything. It couldn't. Kings didn't look at girls like her. Peace. The night everything changed, Lyra was walking back from the well. It was late, later than she should have been out, but one of the buckets had a crack in it, and she'd had to go back for another trip. The streets were empty, the sky dark and moonless. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees on the ridges. She heard the footsteps behind her before she saw anyone. She turned. 3 men, rough-looking, with the kind of eyes that said they'd done bad things before and would do them again. One of them was grinning. Lyra's pulse spiked. She took a step back, water sloshing from the bucket. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do we," the grinning man said, his voice slick and oily. "Just a little company. Pretty girl like you shouldn't be walking alone." "I'm fine," Lyra said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, just let me go." The man's grin widened. He took a step closer. "Come on, sweetheart, don't be like that." Another step back. Her heel hit a stone and she stumbled, catching herself. The men laughed, and then a voice cut through the dark like a blade. "Touch her, and you won't have hands to regret it with." The 3 men froze. Ronan Hale stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't wearing armor this time, just a dark coat and trousers, a knife at his belt. But he didn't need armor. The way he moved, the way he looked at them, made it abundantly clear he could kill all 3 without breaking a sweat. The grinning man's smile died. "Your Majesty, we were just leaving," Ronan said. His voice was quiet, deadly. "Now." The men ran. Lyra stood there, shaking, bucket still gripped in both hands. Ronan walked over to her. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought. Taller, broader. He smelled like leather and smoke and something sharp she couldn't name. "You're out late," he said. "The bucket broke," Lyra said, her voice barely steady. "I had to come back." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he took the bucket from her hands and started walking toward the tavern. Lyra blinked. "What are you—" "Come on," he said over his shoulder. "I'll walk you back." She hurried to catch up. They didn't talk much on the way back. Lyra didn't know what to say, and Ronan didn't seem like the type to fill silence just for the sake of it, but the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was strange, but not bad. When they reached the tavern, he set the bucket down by the door. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly. He nodded. Then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out and gently tilted her chin up with 2 fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You don't belong here," he said. Her heart stuttered. "I don't have anywhere else." "You do now." She blinked. "What?" His expression didn't change. "You're coming with me." What? Why?" "Because I'm claiming you," he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And when a king claims someone, they become untouchable. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "You can't just—" "I can. And I am." He stepped back, dropping his hand. "Pack your things. We leave at dawn." "Wait." But he was already gone, disappearing into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. Lyra stood there, heart racing, mind spinning. A king had just claimed her. She didn't know what that meant, didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if she should be terrified or hopeful or both. But when she finally went inside and climbed the stairs to her room, she found she couldn't stop shaking. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at the peeling wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why would a king claim her? She was nobody, a cast-off, a girl with no name, no family, no prospects. What could he possibly want with her? Unless this was another Corvin, another man who saw something he could use and discard when he was done. The thought made her stomach turn. But then she remembered the way Ronan had looked at her. Not like Corvin had. Calculating, possessive, always measuring what she was worth to him. Ronan's gaze had been different. Intense, yes, but not cruel. And he'd saved her. Not because he had to. Not because anyone was watching. Just because he could. Lyra pressed her hands to her face and exhaled slowly. She didn't understand any of this, but when dawn came, she packed her sack. The same 3 dresses, the same broken hairbrush, the same book of pressed flowers, and walked downstairs. Maris was already up, kneading dough in the kitchen. "So it's true," Maris said without looking up. "You're leaving." "How did you—" "The king doesn't walk women home for no reason." Maris punched the dough harder than necessary. "You know what you're doing?" "No," Lyra admitted. "Good. At least you're honest." Maris finally looked at her. Her expression was hard, but there was something almost kind beneath it. "Be careful, girl. Kings are dangerous, even the good ones." "I will." Maris nodded. Then, to Lyra's surprise, she pulled a small loaf of bread from the oven and wrapped it in cloth. "Here, for the road." Lyra took it, throat tight. "Thank you. For everything." "Just don't die," Maris said gruffly. "I hate training new girls." Ronan Hale rode into the square exactly at dawn, leading a second horse, a gray mare with intelligent eyes. He didn't say good morning, didn't ask if she was ready, just gestured to the mare. Lyra climbed into the saddle, her hands clumsy on the reins. She'd ridden before, but not often, and not well. Ronan noticed. "You'll learn," he said. Then he turned his horse and started riding. Lyra followed. Behind her, the town of Ironwood grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared entirely behind the trees. The journey to the capital took 4 days. They rode through forests that seemed to go on forever, over hills where the wind cut like knives, past farms where people stopped their work to stare. Ronan didn't explain anything, didn't tell her where they were going or what would happen when they got there. He just rode, silent and steady, and Lyra followed. They stopped at night to camp. Ronan built fires with quick, efficient movements, handed her a blanket without comment, and rationed out food, dried meat, hard cheese, bread. On the second night, Lyra finally worked up the courage to ask, "Why me?" He looked at her across the flames. The firelight made his scars stand out sharper, his eyes darker. "You feel it, don't you?" he said. "Feel what?" "The pull." She froze. Because she did feel it. She'd felt it since the first time he looked at her. A strange, electric hum in her chest, like something inside her recognized something inside him. Like an invisible thread had been tied between them the moment their eyes met. She'd thought she was imagining it. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Ronan said. "Soon." He didn't elaborate. and Lyra didn't push. But that night, she dreamed. She dreamed of fire, of wings, of a voice that spoke in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. "Wake up," the voice said. "Wake up! You've been sleeping too long." She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, skin slick with sweat. Across the dying fire, Ronan was watching her. "You dreamed," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to speak. "It's starting," he said quietly. "What's starting?" He didn't answer. The capital wasn't what Lyra expected. She'd imagined something like Harrow's Gate, but bigger, more impressive. Towers and gardens and cobblestone streets lined with shops. Instead, she got a fortress. Massive stone walls built into the side of a mountain, watchtowers rising like teeth against the sky. Inside, the streets were narrow and steep, the buildings sturdy and plain. Soldiers walked the walls in shifts. Blacksmiths hammered steel in open forges. Everything smelled like smoke and iron and sweat. It wasn't beautiful, but it was strong. Ronan led her through the gates, past guards who saluted without question, and up a winding road that climbed toward the keep at the top. People stopped to stare, whispered, pointed. Lyra kept her head up, but her hands were shaking. Inside the keep, the halls were cold and echoing. Torches burned in iron brackets. Servants moved like ghosts, quick and quiet. Ronan brought her into the great hall. It was a massive room with high ceilings and thick stone pillars. A long table ran down the center, and at the far end a group of men in fine clothes, counselors Lyra guessed, turned to look as they entered. One of them stepped forward. He was older, with gray hair and sharp eyes, wearing robes that marked him as someone important. "Your Majesty," he said carefully. His gaze flicked to Lyra, then back to Ronan. "Who is this?" Ronan's hand settled on Lyra's shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her since the night by the well, and the weight of it felt like an anchor, grounding, claiming. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the hall like a drumbeat, "is Lyra Voss, and as of this moment, she is my queen." Silence. Then the hall erupted. The counselors shouted, argued, demanded explanations. One of them, a thin man with a pointed beard, looked like he might actually faint. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented," the gray-haired man stammered. "You can't just... There are protocols, agreements, alliances to consider." "I'm the king," Ronan said flatly. "I don't need protocols." "But she's... Who is she? Where does she come from? What family? What lineage?" "None of your concern." "It's every concern. A queen must..." Ronan's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Enough!" The room went silent. He looked down at Lyra. His storm gray eyes were unreadable, but there was something in them, something that might have been a question. "Do you accept?" he asked quietly. Lyra's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. Her hands were shaking. Her mind was screaming that this was insane, impossible, too much. But she thought about Corvin, about Celine, about the way they'd thrown her away like garbage. She thought about the pull, the hum, the dreams. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who believed she was worthless. And she thought about the girl she might become. She lifted her chin. "I accept," she said. The words came out stronger than she expected. And the moment they left her mouth, something shifted. The air in the hall seemed to thicken. The torches flickered, and deep inside Lyra's chest, that strange hum turned into a roar. Several of the counselors took a step back. Ronan's hand tightened on her shoulder. Not painful, just present. "It's done," he said. "Prepare the coronation." What? They crowned her that night. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no priests, no flowers, no songs. Just Ronan, the counselors watching with varying degrees of horror and disbelief, and a silver circlet placed on her head. The metal was cold against her skin. When it was done, Ronan took her arm and led her out of the hall, up a winding staircase, to a tower chamber that overlooked the city. "This is yours," he said. The room was large and sparse, a bed with thick furs, a desk, a window with shutters that didn't quite close all the way, a fire burning in the hearth. It was more than she'd ever had. "Sleep," Ronan said. "Tomorrow, the real work begins." What work? His expression darkened. Teaching you what you are. What I am? He hesitated. Then he stepped closer and pressed his hand flat against her chest, right over her heart. She gasped. Because the moment his hand touched her, the hum exploded into something massive. Heat flooded her veins. Her vision blurred. Her knees buckled and she would have fallen if he hadn't caught her. And for just a second, one bright, terrible second, she saw it. A shape. Coiled inside her like a sleeping beast. Massive. Ancient. Made of fire and fury and something so old it didn't have a name. You carry the old blood, Ronan said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos in her head. The power that built kingdoms and burned them down. It's been dormant your whole life, but it's waking up now. Lyra stumbled back, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. That's impossible. It's the truth. Why didn't you tell me? Because you wouldn't have believed me. He stepped toward the door. Get some rest, Lyra. You're going to need it. He left. And Lyra stood there, alone in a stone tower in a kingdom she didn't know, wearing a crown she didn't understand. Her chest still burned where he'd touched her, and deep inside, beneath the fear and the confusion, something stirred, something wild, something that had been waiting a very, very long time to wake up. Lyra didn't sleep. She lay in the massive bed with the furs pulled up to her chin, staring at the ceiling while the fire crackled and popped in the hearth. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, that thing coiled inside her, that shape made of fire and ancient rage. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Around midnight, she gave up trying to rest. She got out of bed, wrapped herself in one of the furs, and walked to the window. The shutters rattled in the wind, and through the gap she could see the city below, scattered lights like fallen stars, the dark shapes of buildings pressing against each other, and beyond it all the black outline of mountains against a slightly less black sky. This was her kingdom now. The thought was so absurd she almost laughed. 3 weeks ago, she'd been scrubbing floors in a tavern, and now she wore a crown. She touched the circlet still resting on the desk where she'd placed it. The silver was cold under her fingertips, real and solid and terrifying. A knock at the door made her jump. "It's open," she said, her voice coming out rougher than she intended. The door swung inward. A woman stepped through, older, maybe 50, with iron-gray hair braided tight against her scalp, and the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. "I'm Marin," the woman said without preamble. "The king sent me. I'm to help you prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For court. For ruling. For not getting yourself killed in the first week." Marin's eyes swept over Lyra with the same clinical assessment a butcher might give a side of beef. "You're smaller than I expected. I didn't ask to be here. No one ever does." Marin crossed the room and threw open a wardrobe Lyra hadn't noticed. Inside were dresses, deep reds and dark greens, simple cuts but fine fabric. "The king wants you in the council chamber at dawn. That gives us about 4 hours to make you look like a queen instead of a refugee." Lyra bristled. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." Marin pulled out a dark green dress and held it up to the light. "And there's no shame in it, but if you're going to survive here, you need to understand something. This court will eat you alive if you let them. They already think you're a mistake, a distraction, some peasant girl the king picked up on a whim." "Isn't that what I am?" Marin's eyes sharpened. "Is it?" Lyra didn't have an answer. "Get dressed," Marin said. "We have work to do." Dawn came too fast. Lyra stood outside the council chamber wearing the green dress, which fit better than she'd expected, with her hair pulled back and the silver circlet pressed against her temples. Marin had scrubbed her face, trimmed her nails, and given her a lecture about posture that had made Lyra's spine ache just listening to it. "Remember," Marin had said before they left the tower room, "you don't have to win them over. You just have to make them think twice before they cross you." Now, standing in the cold stone hallway with guards flanking the door, Lyra wasn't sure she could make anyone think twice about anything. The doors opened. The council chamber was smaller than the great hall, but no less intimidating. A heavy wooden table dominated the center, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Maps covered the walls, territories, borders, trade routes. And seated around the table were 6 men, all of them older than Lyra, all of them watching her with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Ronan sat at the head of the table. He didn't stand when she entered, didn't smile, just gestured to the empty chair at his right. Lyra walked to it, forcing herself to move steadily, and sat. "Gentlemen," Ronan said, his voice flat and businesslike, "this is Queen Lyra. She'll be joining us from now on." The gray-haired man from the coronation, Lord Garrett, Lyra remembered, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, with all respect, the Queen's presence here is unusual. Council meetings deal with matters of war, trade, taxation." "Then she'll learn," Ronan said. "But she stays." Ronan's tone left no room for argument. "Now, what's the report from the eastern border?" For the next 2 hours, Lyra sat in silence while the counselors talked. They discussed grain shipments and bandit raids, disputed mining rights in the northern hills, a trade agreement with the coastal cities that was falling apart because of tariffs, and toward the end, something that made the whole room go tense. "There's been movement," said a thin man with a hawk-like face, Lord Corbin. "3 kingdoms, Weimar to the east, Solvaris to the south, and the Iron Reach across the western pass. Our scouts report increased military activity along all 3 borders." Ronan's expression didn't change. Define increased. "Troops being moved into position, supply trains, fortifications being reinforced." Corbin spread a map across the table. "Individually, it could mean nothing. But all 3 at once? That's coordinated." "They're preparing for something," another counselor said. "Or they're trying to make us think they are," Garrett countered. "Could be a bluff, testing our response." "Could be," Ronan said. "Or it could be the start of an alliance we've been hearing whispers about for months." The room went quiet. Lyra looked at the map. She didn't understand half the markings, but she understood the shape of the kingdom, hail territory pressed in on 3 sides, like a fist being slowly closed. "What do we do?" Corbin asked. "We watch," Ronan said, "and we prepare. Double the patrols. Send word to the garrison commanders to ready their troops. If this is a bluff, we'll call it. If it's not—" He paused. "Then we'll be ready." After the meeting ended, the counselors filed out, most of them not even glancing at Lyra. She stayed seated, staring at the map. Ronan stood. "Walk with me." She followed him out of the chamber, down a corridor and up a narrow staircase that led to the battlements. The wind up here was brutal, cutting through her dress like knives, but the view was staggering. She could see for miles, forests, hills, the snaking line of a river in the distance. "You didn't say anything in there," Ronan said. "I didn't know what to say." "That's fine. You're learning." He leaned against the stone wall, arms crossed. "But eventually, you'll need to speak. They need to see you as more than decoration." "I don't know anything about war or trade or—" "You'll learn," he said again. "You're smarter than you think." She looked at him, startled. "How would you know?" "Because you're still standing." He turned to face her fully. "Most people in your position would have broken by now. Run. Collapsed. You haven't." "Maybe I'm just too stubborn to know when to quit." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. It was gone so fast she almost missed it. "Good. You'll need that." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Lyra asked the question that had been eating at her since last night. "What you said about the old blood, about something waking up inside me. What does that mean?" Ronan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 1,000 years ago, this land was ruled by people who could shape the world with their will. They called it the Old Blood. The power to command fire, stone, wind, to heal or destroy with a thought. But it faded, diluted over generations until it was just a story. He looked at her. "You carry it. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I felt it the first time I saw you, and so did you." "I don't feel powerful," Lyra said quietly. "I feel terrified." "That's because you haven't learned to control it yet." "Can I?" "You'll have to." His expression hardened. "Because if those 3 kingdoms are planning what I think they're planning, we're going to need every advantage we can get, including you." That afternoon, Ronan took her to a courtyard deep inside the keep. It was empty except for a few training dummies and weapon racks. The ground was packed dirt, scuffed and stained from years of use. "What are we doing here?" Lyra asked. "Testing a theory." Ronan walked to the center of the courtyard. When I touched you last night, you felt something. That wasn't me. That was you, reacting to a trigger. What kind of trigger? Intent, focus, will. He gestured for her to come closer. The old blood doesn't just sit inside you doing nothing. It responds to emotion, to need, to danger. Lyra's stomach twisted. I don't know how to... That's why we're here. He picked up a wooden practice sword and tossed it to her. She caught it awkwardly. What am I supposed to do with this? Hit me. She blinked. What? You heard me. Swing. I'm not going to... do it. Lyra hesitated, then lifted the sword and took a half-hearted swing. Ronan didn't even move. The blade stopped a foot from his shoulder. Harder, he said. I don't want to hurt you. You won't. She swung again, putting more force behind it. The blade cut through the air, and Ronan caught it with one hand, stopping it dead. Again, he said. This is pointless. Again. She swung. He blocked, over and over until her arms burned and sweat dripped down her back. You're holding back, Ronan said. I'm trying. No, you're afraid. He stepped closer, still gripping the blade. You've spent your whole life making yourself small, invisible, safe. But you're not safe here, and you can't afford to be small. I don't know how to be anything else. Yes, you do. His eyes locked on hers. Stop thinking. Stop controlling. Just feel. Feel what? The anger. His voice dropped. The hurt. Everything Corvin did to you, everything Celine said, every person who made you feel worthless. Feel it and let it out. Something cracked open inside her chest. She swung. The practice sword exploded. Not broke, not splintered. Exploded. Into splinters and dust and fragments that hung in the air for half a second before raining down. Lyra stumbled back, staring at her hands. Ronan smiled. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him. There it is. How did I... You stopped holding back. He kicked at the debris. That's the old blood, raw, unrefined, dangerous as hell. But it's there. Lyra's hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from power. Over the next week, Ronan trained her every day. Not to fight, she was terrible with weapons, and they both knew it, but to access the thing inside her, to pull at it, shape it, control it, even just a little. It was exhausting. Some days nothing happened. She'd stand in the courtyard for hours, focusing until her head pounded, and the most she'd manage was a faint warmth in her palms. Other days she'd lose control completely. Once, she shattered every window in the courtyard. Another time, she set a training dummy on fire without touching it. Ronan never yelled, never got frustrated. He just watched, corrected, pushed. You're getting stronger, he said one evening as they walked back to the keep. I'm getting dangerous, Lyra replied. Same thing. She stopped walking. What if I hurt someone? Then you learn not to. He turned to face her. Power isn't the problem, Lyra. Fear is. The more afraid you are of what you can do, the less control you have. You need to stop treating it like a curse and start treating it like a tool. Easy for you to say. It's not. His voice was quiet. I've seen what unchecked power does. I've seen men drunk on it destroy everything they touch. But I've also seen what happens when people who should have power refuse to use it. They get crushed. And everyone who depends on them gets crushed with them. Lyra looked at him, really looked. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just strength. It was weight. Is that what happened to your brother? She asked. Ronan went very still. I heard the servants talking, Lyra said quickly, about a prince who left, who abandoned his duty. They didn't say much, but... Darian, Ronan's jaw tightened. My younger brother. He was supposed to lead the southern forces. Instead, he drank himself half to death and ran the first time things got hard. Where is he now? I don't know, and I don't care. But the way he said it, hard and clipped, told Lyra he cared very much. She didn't push. 2 weeks after Lyra's coronation, the first assassin came. She was in her chamber reading a report Marin had given her about grain yields when she heard the window shutter creak. She looked up. A figure in black dropped through the opening, knife already in hand. Lyra didn't think, didn't scream, she just reacted. Heat surged through her veins. Her hand shot out, and fire erupted from her palm. The assassin tried to dodge. Didn't make it. The flames caught his shoulder and he went down hard, rolling, cursing, trying to smother the fire. The door burst open. Guards poured in, followed by Ronan. The assassin was disarmed and dragged away in seconds. Ronan crossed the room to Lyra. "Are you hurt?" "No." Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. I didn't mean to." "You defended yourself." He gripped her shoulders. "That's all that matters. I could have killed him." "Yes, you could have." His eyes were hard. "Remember that." The assassin talked. Under interrogation, which Lyra didn't ask about and didn't want to know about, he revealed he'd been hired by someone in Weimar. No name, just gold and a target. The message was clear. The other kingdoms weren't just watching anymore. They were moving, and Lyra had a target on her back. "Why me?" she asked Ronan that night. They were in the war room, maps spread across the table. "I'm nobody. What do they gain by killing me?" "You're not nobody." Ronan traced a finger along the eastern border. "You're the king's weakness, or at least that's what they think. Kill you, and they think I'll break, lose focus, make mistakes. Will you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't break." But something in his expression made her wonder if that was entirely true. The council met again the next morning, and this time the mood was different, darker, more urgent. "We've confirmed it," Lord Corbin said, his voice tight. "Weimar, Solvaris, and the Iron Reach have formed an alliance. They're calling it the Triumvirate, and they're mobilizing for war." "How long do we have?" Ronan asked. "Weeks, maybe a month. And they're coming for us. All of them, at once." Corbin's hand shook slightly as he pointed to the map. 3 armies, 3 fronts. "We can't hold against that, not without—" "Without what?" Garrett snapped. "Allies? We don't have any. The coastal cities won't risk it. The northern clans are neutral. We're alone." "Then we make them regret that choice," Ronan said coldly. "With what army?" another counselor demanded. "We're outnumbered 3-1. "Then we don't fight them head on." The room went quiet. Lyra leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" Ronan's eyes were ice. "We take the fight to them, before they're ready, before they expect it." "That's suicide," Garrett said. "It's the only option." Ronan stood. "We ride for Weimar in 3 days. Small force, fast. We hit their supply lines, force them to pull back troops to defend, break their coordination. And if it doesn't work? Then we die fighting instead of waiting." Ronan looked around the table. "Anyone have a better idea?" No one spoke. "Then it's settled." He turned to Lyra. "You're staying here." "What?" "No, it's not a discussion." "You're right, it's not." Lyra stood, her chair scraping against stone. "Because I'm going with you." "Absolutely not." "You said I needed to learn, to be more than decoration." She met his gaze, refusing to back down. "So let me learn." "This isn't a training exercise. People are going to die." "Then I'll die with them." Her voice didn't waver. "I'm your queen. I'm not hiding in a tower while you fight my war." Ronan stared at her. The whole room held its breath. Finally, he said, "If you slow us down, I'm sending you back." "I won't." "Fine." He turned to the counselors. "Meeting adjourned. We leave at dawn in 3 days. Prepare your men." For the next 72 hours, the keep was chaos. Soldiers sharpened weapons. Blacksmiths worked around the clock. Supply wagons were loaded and loaded again. Lyra spent the time with Marin, learning how to ride properly, how to pack light, how to sleep on the ground without freezing. "You're making a mistake," Marin said bluntly on the second night. "Probably." "The king's trying to protect you." "I know." "Then why go?" Lyra looked at her. "Because if I stay here, I'll always be the girl who needed protecting, and I'm done being that girl." Marin studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Fair enough." The night before they left, Lyra couldn't sleep again. She stood on the battlements, wrapped in a cloak, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, 3 armies were sharpening their swords and planning how to destroy everything she'd somehow become part of. She heard footsteps behind her. Ronan appeared beside her, silent as always. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft. "Because for the first time in my life, I have something worth fighting for." He looked at her, and for just a second, something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. "Don't die," he said. "You either." He almost smiled. "Deal." They rode out at dawn. 50 soldiers, light armor, fast horses. Ronan led them, with Lyra riding just behind him, her hands tight on the reins. As they passed through the gates, people lined the streets, watching, silent. Some looked afraid, others looked hopeful. Lyra lifted her chin and kept riding. They traveled hard for 2 days, cutting through forest trails and back roads, avoiding the main routes. At night, they camped without fires, eating cold rations and sleeping in shifts. On the 3rd day, they crossed into enemy territory. The land here looked the same, trees, hills, rocky soil, but it felt different, hostile. Ronan called a halt near midday. He gathered the officers around him, Lyra included. "Supply depot is 5 miles ahead," he said, pointing to a crude map sketched on parchment. "Lightly guarded. We hit it, burn everything, and disappear before reinforcements arrive." "And if there are reinforcements already there," one of the soldiers asked, "then we adapt." Ronan's eyes swept the group. "Remember, speed over caution. We're not here to win. We're here to hurt them." They moved. The supply depot sat in a clearing surrounded by trees, wagons, crates, tents, maybe 20 guards. Ronan's force hit them like a storm. Lyra stayed back at first, like Ronan had ordered. But when she saw one of their soldiers go down, an arrow in his leg, something inside her snapped. She dismounted and ran forward. "Lyra, get back!" Ronan shouted. She didn't listen. An enemy soldier turned toward her, sword raised, and Lyra let go. Fire roared out of her, a wave of heat and light that sent the man flying. Another guard charged. She flung her hand out, and he crumpled, clutching his chest like something invisible had punched through him. She didn't know what she was doing, didn't know how she was doing it. She just knew she was done hiding. The depot burned, the guards scattered, and when the smoke cleared, Ronan was standing in front of her, breathing hard, covered in ash and blood. "I told you to stay back," he said. "I know." He stared at her. Then, to her shock, he laughed, short, sharp, almost disbelieving. "You're insane," he said. "Probably." He shook his head. "Let's go, before they send half their army after us." They rode hard, putting miles between them and the burning depot. But as they rode, Lyra felt something shift. Not just in her, in the air, in the land. Something was coming. They made camp that night in a shallow ravine hidden from the road. Lyra sat by Ronan, exhausted, her hands still trembling from the power she'd unleashed. "You did well today," Ronan said quietly. "I lost control. You protected your people." He looked at her. "That's what matters." Before she could respond, one of the scouts came running. "Your Majesty, we've got movement, a lot of it." Ronan was on his feet instantly. "Where?" "East. Maybe 2 miles. Looks like a full battalion." Lyra's stomach dropped. "They found us." "No." Ronan's expression was grim. "They were already moving. This isn't about the depot." "Then what?" And then she heard it, a sound like thunder, but not from the sky, from the ground. Hoofbeats, hundreds of them. Ronan grabbed her arm. "We need to move, now." But before they could run, a figure stepped out of the darkness at the edge of camp. A man, tall, lean, dark hair tangled and filthy, eyes bloodshot and hollow. He looked half dead, and he was staring straight at Ronan. "Hello, brother," the man said, his voice rough and broken. Ronan went completely still. "Darian," he said. The fallen prince swayed on his feet, barely able to stand. "They're coming," Darian rasped. "All of them. And if you don't listen to me, we're all going to die." Ronan didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at the wreck of a man standing at the edge of their camp like he was looking at a ghost. Darian Hale looked nothing like a prince. His clothes were torn and stained with dirt and what might have been blood. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and his eyes had the hollow, desperate look of someone who'd been running for a very long time. He swayed on his feet, one hand braced against a tree to keep himself upright. "You have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't kill you right now," Ronan said. His voice was flat, cold, the kind of cold that came before violence. Darian laughed. It was a broken, ragged sound. "Still the same bastard I remember." 20 seconds. "They're coming for you," Darian said, his words tumbling out fast. "Weimar, Solvaris, Iron Reach, they're not just mobilizing. They're coordinating. 3 armies, 1 target, you." "We know that already." "You don't know everything." Darian pushed off the tree and stumbled forward a step. "They have someone on the inside, someone feeding them information, routes, troop movements, everything." Lyra felt her stomach drop. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Who?" "I don't know. But I know they knew you'd be here. Tonight, they're moving a battalion to cut you off from the border." Darian's eyes flicked to Lyra, then back to his brother. "And they know about her." "How?" Ronan's hand moved to the hilt of his sword. "How do you know any of this?" Darian hesitated. Then he said, "Because I've been traveling with someone who's been tracking them for months. She saved my life. And she has proof." "She?" Lyra asked. As if on cue, another figure stepped out of the shadows. A woman, tall and lean, with dark skin and hair cropped short against her skull. She wore leather armor that had seen hard use, and twin daggers hung at her hips. Her eyes swept the camp with the practiced assessment of someone who'd walked into enemy territory more times than she could count. "Kalara Thorne," the woman said, her voice low and rough. "Northern clans. And before you ask, no, I'm not here to kill you. If I was, you'd already be dead." Ronan's eyes narrowed. "The clans are neutral." "The clans are also not stupid," Kalara said. "We know what's coming, and we know that if the Triumvirate takes your kingdom, they won't stop there. They'll come for us next. So you're offering an alliance. I'm offering information." Kalara pulled a leather satchel from her shoulder and tossed it to Ronan. "Everything I've gathered over the past 4 months. Supply routes, officer names, battalion movements, and proof that someone in your court has been selling you out since before winter." Ronan caught the satchel but didn't open it. He was still watching Darian. "And him? What's his part in this?" Kalara glanced at Darian with something that might have been pity. "I found him half dead in a ditch 3 weeks ago. Drunk, bleeding, about 5 minutes from freezing to death. Figured he might be useful." "I'm standing right here," Darian muttered. "Barely," Kalara shot back. Ronan finally looked away from his brother. "Why should I trust either of you?" "Because you don't have a choice," Kalara said bluntly. "That battalion, they'll be here in less than an hour. You've got 50 men, they've got 300. You can stand here arguing, or you can listen to what I have to say and maybe live through the night." Silence. Then Ronan opened the satchel and pulled out a stack of papers, maps, letters, lists written in tight, cramped handwriting. His face went hard as stone as he read. "What is it?" Lyra asked quietly. Ronan didn't answer. He just kept reading, his knuckles white where he gripped the papers. Finally, he looked up at Kalara. "If this is real, it's real. Then we're in more trouble than I thought." He turned to his officers who'd been watching the exchange with growing alarm. "Break camp, now. We move in 5 minutes." "Where?" one of them asked. Ronan looked at Kalara. "You said you know these lands." "Better than you do." "Then you're coming with us." He glanced at Darian. "Both of you." Darian straightened slightly, something flickering in his eyes that might have been hope, or just exhaustion. "I can ride." "You can barely stand." "I said I can ride." Ronan stared at him for another long moment. Then he turned away. "Get him a horse. If he falls off, leave him." They rode hard through the darkness, Kalara leading them along narrow trails that wound through dense forest and across rocky streams. Behind them, Lyra could hear the distant sound of the pursuing battalion, hoofbeats like rolling thunder, getting closer with every passing minute. She rode near the back of the column, her hands aching from gripping the reins, her legs screaming from the effort of staying in the saddle. Beside her, Darian swayed dangerously, his face pale and slick with sweat. "You look like you're going to pass out," Lyra said. "Probably," Darian replied through gritted teeth. "Why are you here? You could have just told her what you knew and stayed hidden." Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I owe him, my brother. I left when he needed me most. I was a coward, and I've been paying for it ever since." "So this is about redemption? This is about not dying a coward." He glanced at her, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "You're the queen." "That's what they tell me." "You don't sound convinced." "I wasn't supposed to be here. I was nobody, a girl from a town no one's heard of. And now I'm wearing a crown and riding into a war I don't understand." "Welcome to royalty," Darian said with a bitter laugh. "It's all smoke and terror until you figure out how to make it real." Before Lyra could respond, Kaylara dropped back from the front of the column. "We've got a problem," she said. "What now?" Ronan asked. "The trail ahead splits. One route goes north, toward the mountains. It's slower but safer. The other goes east, straight through open country. Fast, but exposed. Which one do they expect us to take?" "North." "That's what I'd do." Kaylara's eyes glinted. "Which is exactly why we're going east." "That's insane," one of the officers said. "They'll see us." "They'll see us either way," Kaylara countered. "At least this way, we'll be moving too fast for them to catch." Ronan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "East. Let's move." The open country was worse than Lyra had imagined. No trees, no cover, just rolling grassland under a sky that had gone the color of old steel. The wind howled across the plains, carrying the smell of rain and distant smoke. And behind them, the battalion was gaining ground. "They're closing in," one of the scouts reported, his voice tight with fear. "How close?" Ronan asked. "Half a mile? Maybe less." Ronan swore under his breath. He turned to Kaylara. "How much farther to the border?" 3 miles. "We won't make it." "Not all of us, no." Kaylara's expression was grim. "We need a delay. Something to slow them down." Lyra felt a jolt of understanding before anyone else spoke. "You're talking about a rear guard." 10 men, Kaylara said. "Maybe 15. Hold them off long enough for the rest to escape." "That's a death sentence," Darian said. "It's the only option." Ronan reined his horse to a halt. The column stopped around him, riders breathing hard, horses lathered with sweat. "I'll stay," Ronan said. "No." The word came out of Lyra's mouth before she could stop it. Ronan looked at her. "This isn't a discussion." "You're right. It's not." She dismounted, her legs nearly buckling when she hit the ground. "Because I'm staying too." "Lyra, you said I needed to stop being decoration. You said I needed to prove I could fight." She met his gaze, refusing to back down. "So let me fight. This isn't about proving anything. This is about survival." "Exactly." She took a step closer. "If I run now, I'll always be the queen who ran. But if I stand, if I use what I have, maybe I can give you the time you need." Ronan stared at her. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely afraid. Not for himself. For her. "You don't know what you're asking," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." Kaylara cleared her throat. "Hate to interrupt, but we're out of time. Make a decision." Ronan looked at Lyra for another long moment. Then he turned to his officers. "Take the rest of the column and ride for the border. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Your Majesty." "That's an order." He dismounted, handing his reins to one of the soldiers. "Kaylara, you're in command until I return." "And if you don't return?" Kaylara asked. "Then you tell the council to fortify the capital and prepare for siege." He glanced at Darian. "You too. Go!" Darian shook his head. "I'm staying." "You can barely sit upright." "Then I'll fight sitting down." Darian slid off his horse with a grunt of pain. "I'm not running again, Ronan. Not this time." For a moment, the two brothers just looked at each other. Then Ronan nodded once. "Fine. But if you get yourself killed, I'm not mourning you." "Wouldn't expect you to." Kaylara looked between them, then at Lyra. "You're all insane." She kicked her horse forward. "Try not to die. I don't want to explain this to the council." The column rode off, disappearing into the rolling hills, and Lyra, Ronan, and Darian stood alone in the open grassland as the thunder of hoofbeats grew louder. "What's the plan?" Darian asked. He'd drawn a sword, rusted and nicked, but still sharp, and was leaning on it like a cane. "Delay them," Ronan said, "long enough for the others to get clear." "How?" Ronan looked at Lyra. "That depends on her." Lyra's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "What do you need me to do?" "What you did at the supply depot, but bigger." "I don't know if I can." "You can." Ronan's voice was certain, absolute. "I've seen what you're capable of. You just need to stop holding back. And if I lose control, then we all die anyway." He stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "Trust yourself, Lyra. Just this once." The battalion crested the hill. 300 soldiers, armored, armed, moving in tight formation like a single organism. They saw Ronan, Darian, and Lyra standing alone in the grass, and they slowed, stopped. A man rode forward, an officer, judging by the insignia on his breastplate. He was young, maybe 30, with a hard face and calculating eyes. "King Ronan," the officer called out, "you're a long way from home." "So are you," Ronan replied. The officer smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Surrender. Your men are gone. You're outnumbered. There's no point in dying here." "There's always a point," Ronan said. "You just have to decide what it is." The officer's smile faded. "Kill them." The battalion surged forward, and Lyra let go. She didn't know how to describe what happened next. It was like something inside her chest cracked open, a dam breaking, a door slamming wide. Heat flooded her veins so intense it should have burned her alive, but instead it felt like coming home, like waking up after a lifetime of sleep. She thrust her hands forward and fire exploded outward. Not a flame, a wall, a wave, a force of nature that roared across the grassland like a living thing. The front lines of the battalion went down, horses screaming, men diving out of the way, armor glowing red hot. Lyra didn't stop. She pulled at the power inside her, dragged it up from some bottomless well she hadn't known existed, and shaped it. The ground beneath the soldiers' feet cracked, fissures opened, swallowing horses and men alike. The air shimmered with heat so intense the grass ignited. She felt Ronan beside her, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Control it," he said. His voice was calm, steady. "Don't let it control you." Lyra gritted her teeth and focused. The fire condensed, sharpened. Instead of a wild blaze, it became a blade. She swept her arm to the side and the flames followed, cutting a line between the battalion and the fleeing column. The soldiers tried to advance. The fire pushed them back, again and again. Until finally the officer shouted, "Fall back! Fall back!" The battalion retreated, leaving behind scorched earth and wounded men. Lyra collapsed. Ronan caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," he said. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Every part of her felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. But they'd done it. They'd bought time. Darian was sitting on the ground, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "That," he said between gasps, "was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen." Ronan helped Lyra stand. She leaned against him, barely able to keep her eyes open. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I don't know." "You have to." He looked toward the horizon, where the battalion was regrouping. "They'll come again, and next time they'll be ready." "Then we don't give them a next time," Darian said. He staggered to his feet. "We run. Now." They found the horses, spooked but still there, and mounted. Lyra's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the reins, but she stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. They rode. The border was a line of stone markers half buried in the dirt. The column was waiting on the other side, along with Kylara, who looked almost surprised to see them alive. "You made it," she said. "Barely," Ronan replied. Kylara's eyes flicked to Lyra. "What did you do back there?" "What I had to." Kylara studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, something like respect in her expression. "Fair enough." They made camp a few miles inside friendly territory, in a rocky hollow that offered some cover from the wind. Lyra sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her hands. They looked normal, but she could still feel the power humming beneath her skin, like a second heartbeat. Ronan sat down beside her. How do you feel? Empty and full at the same time. She looked at him. Is it always like that? I don't know. You're the only one I've ever met who can do what you do. That's not comforting. He almost smiled. Wasn't meant to be. They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames. Then Ronan said, You were right about coming with us. You saved lives today. I almost lost control. But you didn't. He turned to face her. That's what matters. You held the line when it counted. Lyra looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Pride. Not in her power. In her. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For believing I could do it. He didn't answer. He just reached out and took her hand. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Lyra felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Kailara found them an hour later, her expression grim. We need to talk, she said. Ronan stood. What is it? Kailara spread a map on the ground. I've been going over the intelligence I gathered. The triumvirate isn't just mobilizing, they're converging. All three armies are moving toward a single point. She tapped the map. Here, the Valley of Stones. It's neutral ground, technically. Why there? Lyra asked. Because it's the perfect staging ground for an invasion. Wide, flat, easy to defend. They gather their forces there, they can march on your capital in less than a week. Ronan's jaw tightened. When? 5 days. Maybe 6. That's not enough time to get reinforcements. No, Kailara agreed. It's not. Darian, who'd been listening from the edge of the firelight, spoke up. So what do we do? Ronan stared at the map for a long time. Then he said something that made everyone freeze. We go to them. Lyra blinked. What? We ride to the Valley of Stones. Before they're ready. Before they expect it. Ronan's eyes were hard. And we make them an offer they can't refuse. That's suicide, Kailara said flatly. It's strategy. Ronan looked up. They're expecting us to dig in, to fortify, to wait for them to come to us. We do the opposite. We walk into their camp with 50 soldiers and we force a confrontation. They'll kill us on sight, Darian said, not if we give them a reason not to. Ronan looked at Lyra. Not if we show them what we have. Understanding hit Lyra like a punch to the gut. I want you to show them your power, not as a threat, as proof. Ronan's voice was steady, certain. We make them see that attacking us isn't worth the cost, that we're stronger than they think, that we have something they can't fight. And if they don't believe us, then we die. He said it simply, like it was just another fact. But at least we'll die on our terms, fighting, not cowering behind walls. Lyra's mind raced. It was insane, reckless, the kind of plan that should get them all killed. But it was also the only chance they had. She looked at Kailara. What do you think? Kailara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think you're all out of your minds, but I also think it's the only play left on the board. She looked at Ronan. If we do this, we do it smart. We don't just walk in. We make an entrance, something they'll remember. Agreed, Ronan said. Darian laughed, a sharp, broken sound. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm in. If we're going to die, might as well make it memorable. Ronan turned to Lyra. This is your choice. I won't force you. Lyra thought about Corvin, about being thrown away like trash, about spending her whole life being told she was nothing. And she thought about the fire inside her, the power that had nearly torn her apart, but had also saved lives. I'm in, she said. Ronan nodded. Then we leave at first light. They rode for 3 days. 50 soldiers. 1 broken prince. 1 northern warrior. 1 king. And 1 queen who was still learning what that word meant. The Valley of Stones appeared on the horizon like a scar in the earth, a wide, flat expanse surrounded by rocky cliffs. And in the center, 3 massive encampments, banners flying, thousands of soldiers moving like ants. The triumvirate. Lyra's stomach twisted. Last chance to turn back, Kailara said. We're not turning back, Ronan replied. They rode down into the valley. Within minutes, horns blared, soldiers poured out of the camps, forming lines, weapons drawn. Ronan raised a hand, signaling his men to stop. 3 figures rode out to meet them. The leaders of Weimar, Solvaris, and the Iron Reach. They looked exactly like what they were, warlords dressed in the trappings of kings. The leader of Weimar spoke first. He was older, gray-bearded, with eyes like chips of ice. "King Ronan, you're either very brave or very stupid." "Neither," Ronan said, "just practical. You ride into our camp with 50 men and expect what? Mercy?" "I expect you to listen." The leader of Solvaris, a woman with scars crisscrossing her face, laughed. "Why would we do that?" "Because if you don't, you're going to regret it." The third leader, from the Iron Reach, sneered. "Is that a threat?" "No," Ronan said. "It's a demonstration." He looked at Lyra. She dismounted. Her legs were shaking, but she walked forward until she stood in the open space between the 2 forces. 3 armies on one side, 50 soldiers on the other, and her in the middle. "What is this?" the Weimar leader demanded. "Proof," Ronan said. Lyra closed her eyes, took a breath, and let the fire come. It started as a warmth in her chest, then a heat, then a roar. She opened her eyes and lifted her hands, and the ground beneath her feet cracked. Fire erupted, not wild, not chaotic, but controlled, shaped. It spiraled upward, forming a column that reached toward the sky, bright enough to hurt, hot enough to feel from 100 yards away. The soldiers on both sides stumbled back. Lyra didn't stop. She pulled more, shaped it into forms, wings of flame, claws of light, a shape that looked almost alive. She let it dance and roar and burn, let it fill the valley with heat and terror and awe. And then, with a thought, she snuffed it out. Silence. The valley was silent. Lyra stood there, breathing hard, smoke rising from the scorched earth around her. She looked at the 3 leaders. "That's what you're up against," she said. Her voice carried across the valley, clear and strong. "Not just soldiers, not just walls. Me. And I am done being afraid." The Weimar leader stared at her. His face had gone pale. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm the reason you're going to reconsider this war," Lyra said, and behind her Ronan stepped forward. "We didn't come here to beg," he said. "We came here to offer you a choice. Walk away now, and we part as enemies who chose peace. Attack us, and you'll face her. And I promise you, she won't hold back next time." The silence stretched, and then, slowly, the leader of Solvaris lowered her weapon. "We need to talk," she said. The leader of Solvaris dismounted first. She was a hard-looking woman, maybe 40, with scars that ran like rivers across her weathered face and hands that looked like they'd broken more bones than Lyra could count. Her armor was dented and patched, the kind that spoke of 100 battles survived through skill and brutality rather than luck. She walked forward slowly, her eyes never leaving Lyra. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Lyra Voss?" "Lyra Voss," the woman repeated, testing it. "And you expect us to believe you're what? Some kind of ancient weapon, a fire mage pulled from legend?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Lyra said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I just showed you what I can do. What you believe is your problem." The woman's scarred mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "Fair enough." She turned to the other 2 leaders. "Rendal, Corvin, get down here." The gray-bearded leader of Weimar, Rendal, dismounted with obvious reluctance. He looked at Lyra like she was a snake that might strike at any moment. Corvin, the leader from the Iron Reach, was younger than the others, maybe early 30s, with black hair and the kind of arrogant sneer that came from never having lost a fight. He stayed on his horse. "I'm not negotiating with parlor tricks," Corvin said. "That wasn't a trick," Kalara called out from behind Lyra. She dismounted and was standing with her arms crossed, looking completely at ease despite being outnumbered about 200 to 1. "That was restraint. She could have turned half your army to ash and you know it." Corvin's sneer deepened. "And who are you?" "Someone who's been tracking your movements for 4 months. Someone who knows exactly how many supply wagons you're short, how many of your soldiers are conscripts who don't want to be here, and how thin you're stretched trying to coordinate 3 armies that don't trust each other." Kylara's smile was sharp. "Want me to keep going?" The sneer faltered. Rendell cleared his throat. If we're talking, we do it properly. Not standing in the dirt like common soldiers. He gestured toward the Weimar camp. My tent. 1 hour. Each side brings 3 representatives. No weapons inside the tent. Ronan stepped forward. Agreed. But we choose the location. Neutral ground. Middle of the valley. Rendell's eyes narrowed. You don't trust us? Would you? A pause. Then Rendell nodded. Middle of the valley. 1 hour. The 3 leaders rode back to their camps. Lyra's legs nearly gave out the moment they were gone. Ronan caught her elbow, steadying her. You did well, he said quietly. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. He guided her back toward their horses. The hard part's coming. They'll try to find weaknesses, contradictions, anything they can use against us. What do I say? As little as possible. Let me handle the talking. You just need to sit there and remind them what happens if they push too far. Darian appeared beside them, looking marginally less dead than he had a few days ago. There was color in his face now, and his eyes had lost some of their hollow desperation. That was impressive, he said to Lyra. It was terrifying. Same thing, usually. He glanced at Ronan. You're really going to negotiate with them? I'm going to try. And if it doesn't work... Ronan's expression was grim. Then we find out if 50 soldiers and 1 fire mage can hold off 3 armies long enough for our people to evacuate. That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's both. Ronan mounted his horse, which is why negotiation needs to work. They erected a tent in the exact center of the valley, a simple structure of canvas and poles that offered shade but not much else. Inside, they placed a low table and cushions to sit on, northern style. Lyra sat on Ronan's right. Kalara sat on his left. Everyone else waited outside, soldiers from both sides watching each other with the tense wariness of dogs waiting for the first bite. The 3 leaders arrived exactly on time. Rendell brought a thin, nervous-looking man who carried a leather case full of documents. The Solverus leader, who'd introduced herself as Commander Vera, brought a scarred veteran who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. And Corvin brought a woman with cold eyes and the ink-stained fingers of a scribe. They sat. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Rendell said, Let's not waste time. Why are you here? To prevent a war that benefits no one, Ronan said. That's a bold claim from someone whose kingdom we were planning to carve up in a month. Were, Ronan repeated. Past tense. Interesting choice of words. Rendell's jaw tightened. Don't play games with me, Hale. I'm not playing anything. I'm stating facts. You formed this alliance because you thought we were weak, isolated, an easy target. Ronan leaned forward slightly. You were wrong. 1 mage doesn't change the balance of power, Corvin said. She's not just 1 mage. She's a symbol, and symbols have a way of inspiring people. Ronan's eyes swept the 3 leaders. How many of your soldiers saw what happened out there? How many of them are right now wondering if they really want to fight something like that? Vera spoke for the first time since sitting down. You're bluffing. She's powerful, I'll give you that. But 1 person can't hold off 3 armies. No, Ronan agreed. But she can make it so costly that winning isn't worth the price. How many soldiers are you willing to lose? 100? 1,000? How many burned supply depots and scorched camps before your people start questioning whether this war is worth fighting? Silence. Rendell's scribe leaned over and whispered something in his ear. The old man's expression darkened. You still haven't answered the question, Rendell said. What do you want? A treaty, non-aggression, open borders for trade, and mutual defense if any of us are attacked by an outside force. Corvin laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. You expect us to just forget months of planning, years of grievances? I expect you to be smart, Ronan said flatly. You came here for resources, territory, power. I'm offering you 2 of those 3 without bloodshed, trade routes through our lands, access to our mineral deposits in the north, manufacturing agreements that benefit all 4 kingdoms. He paused. The only thing you don't get is conquest. And frankly, conquest was never guaranteed anyway. He's right, Kalara said. She pulled a document from inside her coat and slid it across the table. These are your supply projections for a 6-month campaign. You're already running thin, and you haven't even started fighting yet. A prolonged war would bankrupt all three of you. Vera picked up the document and scanned it. Her expression went stony. Where did you get this? Does it matter? It's accurate, isn't it? Vera didn't answer. She just set the document down and looked at Rendall. Something passed between them, a wordless communication that Lyra couldn't quite read. Corvin was still sneering. Even if all of this is true, you're asking us to trust you. Why would we do that? Because the alternative is worse, Lyra said. Everyone turned to look at her. She hadn't planned to speak. The words just came out, driven by something deeper than thought. You're right not to trust us, she continued. We wouldn't trust you either. But trust isn't what we're offering. We're offering certainty. If you attack, people die. A lot of people. Yours and ours. Fields burn, towns get destroyed, and when it's over, no matter who wins, everyone's weaker. She met Corvin's eyes. Or you can walk away. Build something instead of destroying it. Make your kingdoms richer through trade instead of conquest. And if some other enemy comes, and they will eventually, you'll have allies instead of ashes. Corvin stared at her. The sneer was gone, replaced by something harder to read. Pretty speech, he said, but words are cheap. Then let's talk terms, Ronan said. Specific, binding, witnessed by neutral parties. We can have a treaty drafted by tomorrow if you're serious. Rendall drummed his fingers on the table. And if we're not? Then we fight. And you'll lose more than you gain, guaranteed. The tent went quiet again. Finally, Vera spoke. I want guarantees, real ones, not just promises. Name them, Ronan said. Trade routes supervised by neutral monitors, tariffs negotiated annually, and a council, representatives from all four kingdoms, that meets twice a year to resolve disputes before they turn into wars. Acceptable, Ronan said without hesitation. Rendall leaned back, studying Ronan with calculating eyes. You came prepared for this. You knew we'd negotiate. I hoped you would. There's a difference. And if we'd attacked instead, then we'd be fighting right now instead of talking. Rendall almost smiled. You've got nerve, Hale. I'll give you that. He looked at his scribe. Draft a preliminary framework, basic terms. We'll review it and reconvene at sunset. Agreed, Ronan said. Corvin stood abruptly. This is a mistake. We have them outnumbered 10-1 and we're negotiating like they hold the cards. They do hold cards, Vera said. Maybe not enough to win, but enough to make winning painful. Use your head, Corvin. Corvin's jaw worked. Then he turned and stalked out of the tent. Vera watched him go, then looked at Ronan. He'll come around. Or he won't. Either way, Solveris is interested in talking. As is Weimar, Rendall added. For now. They stood. The meeting was over. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, turning the valley into a bowl of heat and dust. Lyra walked back toward their camp with Ronan and Kalara, her mind spinning. Did that just work? She asked. Partially, Ronan said. We've got two of them willing to talk. Corvin's the problem. He's young and arrogant, Kalara said. Probably spent years planning this invasion and doesn't want to admit it was for nothing. Men like that are dangerous. Can we afford to make a deal without the Iron Reach? Lyra asked. We might have to, Ronan said. 2 kingdoms is better than 3. And if Weimar and Solvaris pull out, Corvin won't be able to sustain an attack on his own. Darian was waiting for them at the camp, leaning against a wagon wheel. How'd it go? Better than expected, Ronan said. We're reconvening at sunset. And until then? We wait. Darian nodded slowly. Then he said, I need to tell you something. Ronan's expression hardened. What? The spy. The one feeding information to the triumvirate. Darian's eyes were steady. I know who it is. Everyone went still. How? Ronan asked, his voice dangerous. Because I saw him. 3 weeks ago, when Kalara found me. I was half dead in that ditch, but I wasn't unconscious. And I saw a man from our court meet with a Weimar officer. They exchanged documents. Gold. Darian's hands clenched into fists. It was Lord Garrett. Lyra felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Lord Garrett, the gray-haired counselor who'd questioned her coronation, Who'd been at every meeting, every discussion about troop movements and strategy? Ronan's face went blank. Not angry, just empty, which was somehow worse. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because until 3 days ago, I was a drunk coward you had every reason not to believe. And because I needed to be sure. Kailara helped me confirm it. Cross-referenced meetings, documents, timelines. It's him." Ronan turned to Kailara. "Is this true?" "It fits," Kailara said. "Every leak lines up with information Garrett had access to, and there's a paper trail if you know where to look." Ronan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We deal with the treaty first, then we deal with Garrett." "He's probably already sent word back to the capital," Darian said. "Told them what's happening here. If we make a deal, he'll try to sabotage it." "Then we make sure he can't." Ronan's eyes were cold. "After sunset, when the treaty's signed." The afternoon dragged. Lyra tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She kept replaying the meeting in her head, analyzing every word, every expression. Had they believed her? Or were they just humoring her until they could find a weakness? She was sitting by the fire, poking at the embers with a stick, when someone sat down beside her. Vera. The Solvaris commander looked older up close, the scars on her face deeper, her eyes harder. But there was something almost respectful in the way she looked at Lyra. "I wanted to talk," Vera said, "without the others." Lyra tensed. "About what?" "About you." Vera studied her. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone harder, colder, more arrogant." Vera poked at the fire with her own stick. "But you're scared. I can see it. You don't want this power any more than you want this crown." Lyra didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Vera continued. "I grew up in a war zone. Spent my whole life fighting for scraps. And I learned something along the way. Power doesn't care if you want it. It just cares what you do with it." She glanced at Lyra. "You could have killed a lot of people today. You didn't. That says something." "It says I'm afraid of what I'll become if I do." "Good. That fear will keep you human." Vera stood. "I'm voting for the treaty. Whatever Corvin does. Just thought you should know." She walked away before Lyra could respond. Sunset came too fast. They reconvened in the tent. Same arrangement, same people. But this time there was a stack of parchment on the table and a nervous-looking scribe from Weimar holding a quill. Rendall spoke first. "We've drafted terms, preliminary, but binding if all parties agree." He gestured to the scribe who began reading. The terms were dense and full of legal language Lyra barely understood. But the core was simple: non-aggression, open trade, mutual defense, and a council to mediate disputes. When the scribe finished, Rendall said, "Weimar agrees to these terms." Vera nodded. "Solvaris as well." All eyes turned to Corvin. The Iron Reach leader sat with his arms crossed, face unreadable. "No," he said. Rendall's expression darkened. "Corvin?" "I said no." Corvin leaned forward. "You two can play nice if you want, but the Iron Reach didn't come here to make friends. We came here to expand, and I'm not walking away empty-handed." "You're not walking away empty-handed," Ronan said. "You're getting trade access, mining rights." "I'm getting scraps," Corvin interrupted. "While you get to keep your kingdom intact. That's not a deal. That's surrender." "It's survival," Vera said sharply. "For all of us." "It's weakness." Corvin stood. "The Iron Reach withdraws from this alliance. You want to negotiate? Go ahead. We'll see how long your treaty lasts when there's still an army at your border." He walked out. Lyra felt her stomach drop. Rendall swore under his breath. "He's going to attack anyway." "Let him," Ronan said. His voice was calm, too calm. "One army is easier to handle than 3. "You're assuming he acts alone," Rendall said. "What if he finds other allies?" "Then we deal with them when they come." Ronan looked at the scribe. "Finish the treaty. We sign it tonight." The scribe's hand was shaking, but he nodded and bent over the parchment. An hour later, the treaty was done. Rendall signed first, pressing his seal into hot wax. Vera signed second. Ronan signed third. And just like that, three kingdoms that had been preparing for war became allies. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even clean, but it was done. Out. That night, Ronan called Darian and Kailara into his tent. Lyra was there too, sitting on a camp stool, exhausted but too wired to sleep. "Garrett," Ronan said without preamble, "we move tonight." "How?" Darian asked. "Quietly. We send a small group back to the capital. Arrest him before he knows what's happening. Publicly. In front of the council." "And if he resists?" Kailara asked. "Then we make it very clear that resisting is the last mistake he'll ever make." Ronan's eyes were flat. "I want him alive, but I want him stopped." "I'll go," Darian said. "I owe you that much." Ronan looked at his brother. For a moment something passed between them, years of anger and betrayal and regret. Then Ronan nodded. "Take 10 men, fast horses. Don't stop until you reach the capital. And if he's already fled, then you hunt him down." Ronan's voice was ice. "I don't care where he goes. I want him found." Darian left an hour later, riding hard into the darkness with 10 of Ronan's best soldiers. Lyra watched them go, feeling something settle in her chest. This was what ruling felt like. Not crowns and thrones, but decisions. Hard ones. Ones that kept you awake at night. Ronan stood beside her. "You should rest. So should you." "I will. Eventually." He looked at her. "You did well today. In the tent. What you said to Corvin, it mattered. It didn't change his mind." "No. But it changed Vera's. And Rendall's. They saw you as something more than a weapon. That's what we needed." Lyra didn't feel like more than a weapon. She felt tired and scared and way out of her depth. But she nodded anyway. 3 days later, a rider came from the capital. Lyra was in the command tent when he arrived, mud-splattered and exhausted. He knelt before Ronan and said, "Your Majesty, it's done." "Garrett?" "Arrested. Prince Darian brought him before the council in chains. He confessed to everything." Ronan's expression didn't change. "Where is he now?" "In the dungeons, awaiting your judgment." "Good." Ronan dismissed the rider with a wave. "Send word to Darian. Tell him to hold position until I return." After the rider left, Lyra said, "What will you do with him?" "I don't know yet." Ronan rubbed his face. He looked more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Part of me wants him executed, publicly, as a warning." "And the other part?" "The other part knows that mercy is sometimes more powerful than punishment." He looked at her. "What would you do?" Lyra thought about Corvin, about Celine, about everyone who'd hurt her and thrown her away. "I'd make sure he could never hurt anyone again," she said. "But I wouldn't kill him. Death is too easy. Let him live with what he's done." Ronan studied her, then he nodded slowly. "Exile, then. Stripped of title and lands. Sent somewhere he can't do any more damage." "That seems fair?" "Fair." Ronan almost smiled. "There's a word I don't use often. Hacheet." A week later, they rode back to the capital. The journey was slower this time, less frantic. Soldiers sang marching songs. Lyra rode beside Ronan, feeling the tension that had been coiled in her chest for weeks finally start to loosen. When the capital came into view, those massive stone walls built into the mountain, people lined the streets, not to protest, not to question, to cheer. Lyra stared in shock as they rode through the gates. People shouted her name, threw flowers, reached out to touch her horse. "They know," Ronan said quietly. "Word traveled. About the valley. About what you did." "I didn't do anything." "You prevented a war. That's more than most rulers accomplish in a lifetime." They rode up to the keep. Darian was waiting at the entrance, looking more like a prince than Lyra had ever seen him. He'd cleaned up, shaved, cut his hair, found armor that actually fit. He bowed as Ronan dismounted. "Your Majesty, the traitor is secured. The council awaits your judgment." Ronan gripped his brother's shoulder. "You did well." Something flickered in Darian's eyes. Relief. Hope. Maybe redemption. "Thank you," he said quietly. The council chamber was packed. Every counselor, every officer, every noble who could claim a reason to be there. Garrett knelt in the center of the room, hands bound, head bowed. Ronan stood before him. Lord Garrett, you have confessed to treason, to selling information to enemy kingdoms, to putting countless lives at risk for gold. His voice echoed off the stone walls. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Garrett looked up. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. No, Your Majesty. Then I pronounce judgment. You are stripped of all titles, lands, and honors. You will be exiled to the far northern wastes, never to return on pain of death. Your family may keep their holdings, but your name will be struck from all records. You will be forgotten. It was worse than death in a way. To be erased. To become nothing. Garrett's shoulders sagged. Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me, Ronan said coldly. Thank the Queen. She's the one who argued for your life. Garrett's eyes found Lyra. She met his gaze steadily. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it because killing you would make me like you, and I refuse to be that person. Guards dragged Garrett away. The chamber erupted in conversation. Ronan raised a hand for silence. There's more. He turned to Darian. My brother has proven his loyalty and his courage. He prevented a conspiracy from destroying us from within, and he rode into battle when he could have stayed hidden. He paused. Prince Darian Hale is hereby restored to his full rank and privileges. He will command our southern forces and serve on this council. Darian looked stunned. Ronan, don't make me regret it, Ronan said, but there was something almost warm in his voice. Darian bowed. I won't. The council chamber erupted again, this time in approval. That night, Lyra stood on the battlements again, looking out over the city. Ronan found her there, like he always did. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much happened. My brain won't stop. He leaned against the wall beside her. It'll get easier. Will it? No, but you'll get better at handling it. He looked at her. You've changed since the day I found you in Ironwood. You're stronger now. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's what strength is, holding together when everything's falling apart. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the council voted, unanimously. You're not just queen by my decree anymore. You're queen by their choice. Lyra's breath caught. What? They respect you. What you did in the valley. How you handled Garrett. They see what I saw. Someone worth following. Tears pricked at Lyra's eyes. She blinked them back. I thought I'd always be the girl no one wanted. You're not that girl anymore. Ronan reached out and took her hand. You're the queen who stopped a war, who turned enemies into allies, who proved that power without mercy is just as dangerous as mercy without power. Lyra looked at their joined hands. What happens now? Now we build, strengthen the treaties, prepare for whatever Corvin throws at us, train you to control your power. He squeezed her hand. And we prove that we're more than just survivors. We're the future. For the first time since this whole insane journey began, Lyra smiled. A real smile. Because she believed him. The future arrived faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after the council vote, reports started coming in from the border. Corvin was mobilizing, not for a full invasion, he didn't have the numbers for that anymore, but for targeted strikes. Hit-and-run attacks on border settlements, supply caravans, anything he could reach without committing to open war. Lyra was in the war room when the latest report came in. A farming village called Millstone Ford had been burned. 12 people dead. Crops destroyed. The survivors had fled north. He's testing us, Ronan said, studying the map where red markers indicated each attack. Seeing how we respond. He's killing people, Lyra said. Her hands were clenched into fists on the table. We need to stop him. We will, but not by charging in blind. Ronan traced a line on the map. He wants us angry, wants us to make mistakes. We need to be smarter than that. Darian was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He'd been attending every council meeting since his restoration, and Lyra had noticed how the other counselors had slowly started treating him with something approaching respect. What if we cut off his supply lines? Darian suggested. Force him to pull back to defend his own territory. That takes time we don't have, Kelara said. She'd stayed on as an advisor, claiming she wanted to see how this all played out. Lyra suspected she just enjoyed having a front row seat to history. Every day we wait, more people die. Then we don't wait, Lyra said. We go to him. Everyone turned to look at her. What are you suggesting? Ronan asked carefully. The same thing we did in the valley. We ride to his camp, small force, fast, and we make him an offer. He already refused the treaty. He refused it when he thought he had leverage. Now he doesn't. Lyra stood, moving to the map. Vaemar and Solvaris are our allies. He's alone. We show up with proof of that alliance, signed documents, joint patrols, whatever it takes, and we give him one more chance. Join the treaty or face all three kingdoms. He'll never agree, one of the counselors said. Maybe not, Lyra agreed. But his soldiers might. If they see he's leading them into a fight they can't win, they might decide he's not worth dying for. Ronan studied the map, his expression unreadable. It's risky. Everything we've done has been risky. It's worked so far. A long silence, then Ronan nodded. We'll need Rendal and Vera on board. This only works if we present a united front. I'll send word, Kailara said. They'll come. They have as much to lose as we do if Corvin keeps this up. Then we move in 3 days, Ronan said. Same approach as last time, but this time we're not asking. We're demanding. The messages went out that night. Rendal responded first. His reply was brief and to the point. Agreed. Vaemar will send 200 soldiers. We meet at the Iron Crossing in 4 days. Vera's response came the next morning. About time someone put that arrogant bastard in his place. Solvaris is with you. 4 days later, Lyra stood at the Iron Crossing, a wide, shallow river that marked the border between Hale territory and the Iron Reach. On one side stood Ronan's forces. 200 Vaemar soldiers were arrayed to the east, 300 from Solvaris to the west, 800 soldiers total, all of them waiting. Corvin's camp was 5 miles south. Scouts reported he had maybe 400 men, and morale was low. The hit-and-run tactics had kept them moving, kept them tired. They were soldiers, not raiders. This wasn't the war they'd signed up for. Ronan sat on his horse beside Lyra, watching the southern horizon. Last chance to back out, he said. I'm not backing out. Didn't think so. He almost smiled. But I had to offer. Rendal rode up, his gray beard braided now, his armor polished to a shine. Your plan better work, Hale. I didn't bring my best troops just to watch. It'll work, Ronan said with more confidence than Lyra felt. Vera appeared on Rendal's other side, looking like she'd been born in the saddle. Scouts report Corvin's moving his camp. He knows we're here. Good, Ronan said. Let him sweat. They rode south as a single column, 800 soldiers moving like a storm across the landscape. The sound of hoofbeats was like thunder. The sight of 3 armies moving in perfect coordination was enough to make hardened warriors reconsider their life choices. Corvin's camp came into view just after midday. It was smaller than Lyra remembered. Fewer tents, fewer soldiers, and the men who were there looked exhausted. Corvin himself rode out to meet them, flanked by maybe 20 officers. He looked older somehow, harder. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, fragile. 3 kingdoms, he said when they were close enough to talk. Impressive. Must have taken a lot of gold to buy this kind of loyalty. We didn't buy anything, Ronan said. We built it. Something you'd understand if you spent less time conquering and more time leading. Corvin's jaw tightened. You came here to lecture me? We came here to give you a choice. Ronan gestured to the armies behind him. Join the treaty, open trade, mutual defense, or refuse and face all of us at once. That's not a choice. That's extortion. Call it what you want, Vera said. The offer stands. Corvin looked at the assembled forces. Lyra could see the calculation in his eyes, the realization that he was outnumbered 2 to 1, that his soldiers were tired, that continuing this fight would end in disaster. But pride was a powerful thing. And if I refuse, Corvin asked, then you die here, Rendal said flatly, along with everyone loyal enough or stupid enough to follow you. You'd slaughter us? We'd defeat you, Ronan corrected. What happens after that depends on how hard you fight. Corvin's hands were shaking. Lyra saw it, the slight tremor in his fingers where they gripped his reins. He was terrified, and he was trying desperately not to show it. "I need to consult with my officers," Corvin said. "You have 1 hour," Ronan said. "After that, we assume your answer is no." Corvin rode back to his camp. The hour crawled by. Lyra sat on her horse, feeling the weight of 800 pairs of eyes on her back. Some of these soldiers had seen what she could do in the valley. Others had only heard stories, but all of them were wondering if they'd have to see it again today. She hoped they wouldn't, but she was ready if they did. 50 minutes later, Corvin rode back out, alone. He stopped 10 feet from Ronan, dismounted, and knelt in the dirt. "The Iron Reach accepts your terms," he said. His voice was tight, bitter, but clear. Ronan dismounted as well. He walked over to Corvin, and for a moment Lyra thought he might strike him. Instead, Ronan offered his hand. Corvin stared at it. Then, slowly, he took it. Ronan pulled him to his feet. "Welcome to the Alliance, Shapom." The treaty was signed that night in Corvin's own command tent. It was a deliberate humiliation, making him host the ceremony, making his soldiers watch as he bent the knee to a coalition he'd tried to destroy. But it was also pragmatic. His men needed to see him accept defeat with their own eyes, needed to understand that the war was over. 4 leaders, 4 signatures, 4 seals pressed into hot wax. When it was done, Vera raised a cup of wine. To peace, however temporary. To profit, Rendell added with a dry smile, since that's what we're all really here for. To not dying, Darian said from the corner where he'd been watching. That's good too. They drank. Corvin drank last, his expression sour, but he drank. Later, when the others had dispersed to their own camps, Corvin approached Lyra. She was standing outside the tent, looking up at the stars. "I underestimated you," he said without preamble. Lyra turned. "Yes, you did. That display in the valley, the fire, was it real or some kind of trick? Does it matter?" Corvin studied her. "I suppose not. Either way, it worked." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad I didn't have to find out the hard way." "So am I." He almost smiled. Then he walked away, leaving Lyra alone with the stars and the distant sounds of soldiers making camp. Ronan found her there an hour later. "It's done," he said. "I know. 4 kingdoms, 1 alliance. It'll change everything." Lyra looked at him. "Are you worried?" "Always, but also hopeful." He stepped closer. "We did something today that hasn't been done in generations. We chose peace over war. That's worth celebrating. It won't last forever. Nothing does. But it'll last long enough to build something better." He took her hand. "And that's all we can ask for." They stood together in the darkness, watching the camp spread out below them like a constellation of fires. Tomorrow, they'd ride home. Tomorrow, they'd start the hard work of making the alliance real. Trade agreements, border patrols, councils, and compromises. But tonight, they'd won. The journey back to the capital took a week. They traveled slowly this time, stopping in towns along the way. People came out to see them, the queen who could summon fire, the king who'd forged peace from the edge of war. Lyra hated the attention at first, but Marin, who'd traveled with them, pulled her aside one night. "Let them see you," Marin said. "They need to know you're real, that you're not just a story. I'm not comfortable with it." "Good. The day you get comfortable is the day you stop being useful." Marin's expression softened slightly. "You've changed, girl. When I first met you, you could barely look people in the eye. Now you're staring down armies. Be proud of that." Lyra thought about that as they rode, about the girl she'd been, broken, discarded, convinced she was worthless, and about the woman she'd become, still scared, still uncertain, but no longer willing to be small. When they finally reached the capital, the entire city turned out. Banners flew from every building. People lined the streets 10 deep, cheering and throwing flowers. Children climbed on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. Lyra rode beside Ronan, her head high, the silver circlet catching the sunlight. She was their queen, and for the first time she believed it. 3 months after the treaty was signed, Lyra woke up feeling sick. She made it to the basin just in time, retching until her stomach was empty and her throat burned. Marin appeared in the doorway, took one look at her and said, "How late are you?" Lyra wiped her mouth. What? Your monthly bleeding. How late? Understanding hit like a thunderbolt. 5 weeks. Maybe 6. Marin's expression didn't change. I'll send for the healer. The healer confirmed it that afternoon. Lyra was pregnant. She sat in her chamber staring at nothing, trying to process the information. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Ronan's baby. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When Ronan came to her chamber that evening, she told him immediately. She couldn't not tell him. He went very still. You're certain? The healer is certain. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. A child, he said into her hair. His voice was rough, shaking. We're going to have a child. Are you happy? Lyra asked. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were wet. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. They held each other as the sun set outside the window, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The pregnancy changed everything, not immediately, not in ways people could see from the outside, but Lyra felt it, the shift in how people looked at her, how they spoke to her. She wasn't just the queen anymore. She was the future, the continuation of a dynasty. The council was thrilled. Rendal and Vera sent gifts, fine cloth, carved toys, enough well wishes to fill a library. Even Corvin sent something, a small wooden horse beautifully carved, with a note that said only, for the next generation. Darian was ecstatic. I'm going to be an uncle, he said, grinning wider than Lyra had ever seen. I'll teach them to ride, to fight, to drink. You're not teaching my child to drink, Ronan said. Our child, Lyra corrected gently. And no, he's not. Darian just laughed. As the months passed, Lyra's body changed. Her stomach swelled. Her back ached. She got tired faster, frustrated easier. But she also felt something she'd never felt before. Purpose. Not the crown. Not the power. Not even the alliance. This was something deeper, more primal. She was creating life, bringing something new into a world that had tried to destroy her. And she was going to make damn sure that child grew up safe. The Iron Reach tested the treaty twice in those months. Small things. A border dispute. A merchant caravan stopped for inspection. Both times the council responded immediately. Joint patrols from all 4 kingdoms descended on the trouble spots. The message was clear. The alliance was real, and breaking it had consequences. Corvin backed down both times. The third time, he didn't even try. He just sent a formal apology and a crate of wine. He's learning, Kalara said during a council meeting. Slowly, but he's learning. Let's hope it sticks, Ronan said. It did. By the time Lyra was 7 months pregnant, the alliance had settled into something resembling normalcy. Trade was flowing, borders were open. The council met quarterly, and only half the meetings ended in shouting matches. It wasn't perfect, but it was working. Lyra went into labor on a cold morning in early spring. The pain started just after dawn, a tightening in her belly that grew steadily worse. By mid-morning, she was in bed, surrounded by healers and midwives, with Marin barking orders at anyone who got in the way. Ronan paced outside the chamber like a caged animal. Darian sat with him, trying to distract him with conversation. She'll be fine. Women do this all the time. That doesn't make it less terrifying. True, Darian paused. For what it's worth, she's the strongest person I've ever met. If anyone can survive this, it's her. Ronan didn't answer. He just kept pacing. Inside the chamber, Lyra focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. The pain was worse than anything she'd ever felt. Worse than the fire. Worse than the battles. This was her body tearing itself apart to bring new life into the world, and there was nothing she could do except endure. You're doing well, one of the midwives said. Just a little longer. A little longer turned into hours. But finally, as the sun was setting, Lyra felt the pressure shift, felt something give way. And then she heard it, a cry, high and thin and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the head midwife said, smiling. A healthy girl. They cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft cloth, then placed her in Lyra's arms. Lyra looked down at her daughter and felt something break open in her chest. The baby had Ronan's dark hair and Lyra's eyes. She was tiny and red-faced and screaming her lungs out. and she was the most beautiful thing Lyra had ever seen. "Hello," Lyra whispered. "I'm your mother." The baby kept crying. Lyra laughed, a wet, exhausted sound. "I know, the world's scary, but you're safe, I promise." The door burst open. Ronan strode in, his face wild with fear and hope. He stopped when he saw Lyra holding the baby. "She's here," Lyra said. "Our daughter." Ronan crossed to the bed and sank down beside her. He stared at the baby like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Can I?" he asked. Lyra carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Ronan held her like she was made of glass. His hands were shaking. His eyes were wet. "She's perfect," he said. "She's loud," Lyra corrected, but she was smiling. The baby chose that moment to stop crying. She blinked up at Ronan with unfocused eyes, then made a small, contented sound. "What should we name her?" Ronan asked. Lyra thought for a moment. Then she said, "Ember." Ronan looked at her. "Ember?" "She was born from fire, from struggle, from everything we survived to get here." Lyra touched the baby's tiny hand. "She's the proof that something good can come from pain." Ronan's smile was brilliant. "Ember Hail. I like it. Awesome." The kingdom celebrated for 3 days. Feasts in every town, bonfires in every square. People drank and danced and told stories about the queen who stopped a war and the princess born from fire. Delegates from Weimar, Solveris, and even the Iron Reach arrived bearing gifts. Rendall brought a library's worth of books. "For her education," he said gruffly. Vera brought a small sword, for when she's old enough to learn properly. Corvin brought a pendant, a simple piece of carved silver on a chain. "For luck," he said. "Every princess needs it." Darian brought a rocking horse he'd carved himself. It was crude but clearly made with care. "I'm not good at this stuff," he admitted, "but I wanted her to have something from her uncle." Lyra accepted every gift with genuine gratitude, because they weren't just gifts. They were symbols, proof that the alliance was more than just words on paper. It was real. 6 months after Ember was born, Lyra stood on the battlements again. The baby was asleep in the tower chamber, watched over by Marin and a rotating cast of servants who'd all fallen in love with her. Ronan stood beside Lyra, his hand resting on the small of her back. "You're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking." "About what?" Lyra looked out over the city. "About how different everything is. A year ago, I was scrubbing floors in a tavern. I had nothing. I was nothing. You were never nothing." "I felt like nothing." She turned to face him. "And now I'm standing here, queen of a kingdom, mother to a princess, part of an alliance that's changing the world." She shook her head. "It doesn't feel real." "It's real." Ronan pulled her closer. "You made it real. By refusing to give up. By being stronger than anyone, including yourself, thought possible." Lyra leaned into him. "I couldn't have done it without you. We did it together." He kissed the top of her head. "And we're going to keep doing it. Building something that lasts. Something Ember can inherit without fear." Down in the city, lights were beginning to glow as the sun set. Lyra could hear the distant sounds of life. Merchants closing their shops, children being called in for dinner, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith working late. It was ordinary, peaceful, everything she'd fought for. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked quietly. "The peace? I don't know," Ronan admitted, "but I know we'll fight to keep it. And when Ember's old enough, she'll fight too. That's what we're building, not just peace for now, but the foundation for something permanent." Lyra thought about her daughter sleeping in the tower, thought about the world she'd grow up in, one where 4 kingdoms worked together instead of tearing each other apart. Where power was tempered with wisdom, where a girl born from nothing could become anything. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, and better was enough. Years later, when Ember was old enough to ask, Lyra told her the whole story. She told her about Corvin and Celine, about being thrown away and finding herself in the borderlands, about the king who saw something in her when no one else did, about the fire inside her that nearly consumed her but ultimately saved them all. She told her about the valley, the treaty, the alliance. And she told her about the choice she'd made, to stand when she could have run, to fight when she could have hidden, to believe in herself when the world told her she was worthless. Ember listened with wide eyes, sitting cross-legged on the floor of Lyra's chamber. When the story was done, she said, "Were you scared?" "Terrified," Lyra admitted. "But you did it anyway." "Because the alternative was worse, and because I had people who believed in me." She touched Ember's cheek. "That's the secret, little flame. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be willing to act despite the fear." Ember thought about that. Then she said, "Will I have to fight like you did?" "I hope not. We're building this world so you won't have to." Lyra paused. "But if you do, you'll be ready, because you come from fire, and fire doesn't break." Ember smiled. "I like that." "Good." Lyra stood. "Now come on. Your father wants to teach you how to hold a sword, and I want to watch him try to explain why the pointy end goes forward." Ember laughed and ran ahead. Lyra followed more slowly, her hand resting on her stomach where a second child was already growing. The future was uncertain, it always would be. But for the first time in her life, Lyra wasn't afraid of it. She'd been cast aside, broken, remade, and she'd risen from the ruins stronger than anyone imagined. Not because she was special, but because she'd refused to stay down. And that refusal had changed everything. She walked down the corridor toward her family, toward the training yard where Darian was probably already placing bets on how long it would take Ronan to realize he had no idea how to teach a 6-year-old swordplay, toward the future she'd fought so hard to build. The girl who'd been thrown away was gone. In her place stood a queen, a mother, a woman who'd learned that the only person who could decide her worth was herself. And she'd decided she was worth everything. The castle doors opened ahead of her, spilling golden afternoon light across the stone floor. Lyra stepped into it, smiling, and kept walking,